Okay, so if I asked you to just strip away everything, I mean, everything complex about life, forget DNA, forget proteins, all of it, and just name the single most critical fuel for, well, for the entire biological world, what would it be?
That's a great question.
You might think sunlight or water, maybe,
Yeah.
but the actual, the chemical that keeps the lights on.
It would have to be C6H12O6. It's the answer to almost every energy question in nature. Just a simple arrangement of 6 carbon, 12 hydrogen, and 6 oxygen atoms.
We are talking, of course, about glucose, but here's the thing, and this is what I was really wrestling with prepping for this deep dive. When we hear glucose or sugar or carbs, we instantly load that word with baggage.
Oh, absolutely.
We think diet culture, guilty pleasures, diabetes, that 3 p.m. candy bar crash. We've sort of villainized this molecule.
To the point where we forget what it actually is.
Yeah.
And that's a huge, a really dangerous oversight. Because you just can't understand biology or nature or even the human brain without getting a handle on this one molecule.
It's the universal engine.
It really is. It powers a blade of grass, the bacteria in your gut, and, the very thought you're having right now about what I'm saying.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to push aside all the diet fad noise and just look at the raw machinery. We've got a huge stack of research here, everything from 19th century chemistry to modern food production.
And maybe the most important piece, a paper from just this past year, 2025, that, well, it frankly changes the entire game.
It scares me a little bit.
It should. It really does. It shifts the whole paradigm from glucose as fuel to glucose as information.
Correct.
And that one change, it changes everything.
We will definitely get to that big review later on, but we have to start with the basics, the identity crisis. Because I was looking at food labels in my kitchen and I see glucose, I see dextrose, I see blood sugar.
Right.
Are these the same thing? Are they related? What are we even looking at?
This is probably the most common point of confusion. And it's mostly because of how different industries talk about it.
Yeah.
But here's the bottom line. Chemically, physically, molecularly, glucose and dextrose are the exact same thing.
The exact same. Not like a cousin molecule.
Identical, 100%.
Yeah.
Put them under a microscope, run them through a mass spectrometer. They are indistinguishable.
So why the two names? Is it just a marketing gimmick? Does dextrose sound, I don't know, more clinical, less sugary?
There's definitely a marketing element to it today, for sure. You see dextrose on a label, and it feels a little less threatening than sugar.
Right.
But the origin isn't marketing. It actually comes from 19th century physics. It's all about how the molecule interacts with light.
With light. Okay, you have to explain that. This is the chirality thing in the notes.
Precisely. In chemistry, a lot of molecules are chiral. It comes from the Greek word for hand, kir.
And?
Think about your hands. They're mirror images, right? They look the same.
Yeah.
But you can't perfectly stack them on top of each other.
And you can't put your right hand in a left-handed glove.
Exactly. It doesn't fit. Molecules can have that same handedness. And back in the day, before we had all this advanced tech, one way they identified molecules was by shining polarized light through a solution of them.
Okay.
And when they did this with the glucose you find in nature, from grapes or whatever, the beam of light actually rotated.
It twisted the light.
It twisted it to the right.
To the right.
And the Latin word for right is dexter.
Ah, so dextrose.
Dextrose, the right-handed sugar.
Wow. That's surprisingly literal. So dextrose just means right O's.
Pretty much, yeah.
Huh.
Today, in a biochemistry class, we'd call it D-glucose.
Yeah.
But in the food industry and in medicine, that old name dextrose just stuck around.
Which, of course, begs the question, is there a left glucose?
Good.
A sinister. Oh, I think sinister is Latin for left, isn't it?
It is, and there is. It's called L-glucose. And this is where things get really fascinating about life on Earth.
Okay.
You can make L-glucose in a lab. It's a white powder, dissolves in water. It even tastes sweet. But if you eat it, 0 calories.
Wait, hold on. Pause. It's sweet, looks like sugar, tastes like sugar, but has no calories. That sounds like the holy grail for, diet soda. Why isn't everything made with L-glucose?
2 reasons. One is cost. It's very expensive to synthesize. But the bigger reason is biology's lock and key system.
A hand-in-glove thing again.
Exactly. Every single enzyme in your body, all the little machines that break down food for energy, they're all designed for the right-handed glove. If you swallow L-glucose, your enzymes literally can't grab onto it. It just passes right through you.
So all of biology is just right-handed.
Almost exclusively. It's one of the great mysteries, really. Why D-glucose and not L-glucose? We don't really know. But Every plant, every animal, every cell in your body is built to run on the D form. Nature picked a side billions of years ago.
So when I see dextrose on a food label or an IV bag in a hospital, it's basically saying this is the one. This is the biologically active form your body can actually use.
That's it exactly.
Yeah.
In a hospital, the bag will say dextrose. That's the clinical term. But when your doctor discusses your blood test, they'll say your glucose level.
Yeah.
Same molecule, just a different dialect of science.
Okay, let's talk about the physical stuff. White powder. Incredibly soluble, right? The notes say something like 900 grams per liter.
It is remarkably soluble. You can almost dissolve a kilogram of it into a liter of water.
Yeah.
And that's critical because it has to be transported through your blood or through the sap in a plant. If it wasn't so soluble, it would just clog up the works.
The notes also called it a reducing sugar. That sounds very technical. Why does that matter for us?
It matters for cooking and for aging. A reducing sugar just means it's chemically reactive. It has this part of its structure that really wants to bond with amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein.
Okay.
When you sear a steak and it gets that beautiful brown crust, or when bread bakes and gets that golden color, that's the Maillard reaction. And that's your glucose reacting with proteins. In a hot pan, it's delicious. In your body, over decades, that's a different story. It can lead to tissue damage.
And the name glucose itself, not dextrose, but glucose.
That's from ancient Greek, glucose. It meant sweet wine or must, basically the juice from crushed grapes. It's a nice reminder that before factories, our main experience with it was just the sweetness of fruit.
All right, so we know what it is. The right-handed, light-twisting, super soluble sugar that powers the world. Let's dig into that power, the universal engine. How fundamental is this cycle, really?
It's the primary energy axis of the entire planet. I mean, think about it. The sun just blasts Earth with photons, pure energy. But you can't eat sunlight.
Right, I can't plug my brain into a sunbeam. We need a battery.
We need a storage medium, and that is what glucose is. Plants take in water, they take in CO2 from the air, and then they use that solar energy to literally weld those carbon atoms together. They trap the sunlight in the chemical bonds of that C612O6 molecule.
So glucose is literally a battery made of sunlight.
It is. And then we come along.
And we steal the batteries.
We're the battery thieves. We eat the plant, or we eat the animal that ate the plant.
Mm-hmm.
Our digestion breaks it all back down into single glucose molecules, and our cells basically do photosynthesis in reverse. They break the bonds to release that solar energy.
And that creates ATP,
Adenosine triphosphate.
the universal currency.
The universal currency. You want to blink? Pay some ATP. You want to think? Pay some ATP. And you make that ATP primarily by burning glucose.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate for a second. We hear all about the keto diet, about burning fat. The body can burn other things. It's not like we need glucose for everything, do we?
That is true for most of your body. Your muscles, for example, love burning fat. It's a great dense fuel. Your heart actually prefers fatty acids over glucose.
That.
But there is one organ that is an incredibly picky eater. And unfortunately, it's the one in charge.
The brain.
The brain is a glucose hog, an absolute hog. It's only about 2% of your body mass, but it consumes roughly 20% of your total glucose-derived energy.
20%. Why? Why can't the brain just burn fat like a muscle can?
It's a question of speed and access. Fatty acids are big, clunky molecules. They can't easily cross the blood-brain barrier.
That security wall that protects the brain.
Exactly. But glucose is small, it's water-soluble, and it has a VIP pass.
Yeah.
There are special doors called GLUT1 transporters that just wave glucose straight through into the brain.
So the brain is like a high-performance race car that only takes premium fuel.
And it needs it constantly, moment to moment. The brain has almost no storage capacity, it can't store fat, and it only has a tiny emergency stash of its own fuel. It needs a continuous supply from the blood.
Which brings us to the hangry phenomenon in the research. I always thought that was just a funny word, but it's biologically real.
Oh, it's very real. When your blood glucose starts to dip, that's hypoglycemia, your brain senses a fuel crisis, and it immediately starts shutting down non-essential services.
And things like being polite and making good decisions are considered non-essential.
From an evolutionary standpoint, absolutely. Impulse control, complex decision-making, emotional regulation, that all happens in the prefrontal cortex, which is a very energy-hungry part of the brain. When the budget gets cut, that's the first department to see layoffs.
So I just become more primitive, reactive.
You lose your executive function. There was that study on ego depletion, which suggests that willpower itself is a limited resource that runs on glucose. Every time you resist a donut, you burn a little bit of glucose, do that all day without refueling, and eventually the tank runs dry. You snap.
That is both fascinating and terrifying. that my personality is basically contingent on my last meal.
In some ways, yes.
So we have to store this stuff. Plants use starch. We use...
Glycogen. It's often called animal starch. It's the same idea, long chains of glucose, but it's structured differently. It's more branched like a bushy tree, which lets us snap off the glucose molecules much faster when we need them.
And we have two main storage tanks for it, the liver and the muscles. But the notes made a really sharp distinction. One is a bank and one is a hoarder.
This is one of the most elegant parts of our physiology. The liver is the altruist, the community bank. It stores about 100, maybe 150 grams of glycogen.
Okay.
And when your blood sugar starts to drop, like when you're sleeping, the liver senses this. It breaks down its glycogen and releases fresh glucose back into the bloodstream for everyone to use.
It shares. It keeps the brain fed.
It keeps the lights on for the whole system. A real team player.
Good guy, liver. Okay, now tell me about the muscles.
The muscles are the hoarders. They hold way more, maybe 300 to 500 grams, but they are chemically selfish. They're missing one specific enzyme.
Okay.
It's called glucose 6-phosphatase.
Of course it is. And what does that do?
It's basically the key to the exit door.
Yeah.
Without that enzyme, once glucose enters a muscle cell, it gets chemical lock put on it,
Yeah.
and it cannot leave. It is physically trapped inside that muscle cell forever.
So even if my brain is starving for fuel and I'm about to pass out, my big quad muscles are just sitting on this huge pile of sugar saying, nope, sorry, this is mine.
That's exactly what they're saying. This is for me and me alone.
Why would evolution do that? It seems like a terrible design flaw.
Think about survival. If you are running from a predator, you need your leg muscles to have an immediate guaranteed fuel supply. You can't have them sharing their energy with the rest of the body because you might run out of gas mid-sprint. It ensures the fight-or-flight system is always fully loaded.
A survival prioritization. The brain gets the liver stash, the muscles keep their own.
Precisely.
All right, let's pivot from nature to the factory. Because, let's be honest, most of the glucose we eat isn't coming from a piece of fruit. The scale of this industry is just huge.
It's a marvel of industrial chemistry. And in the United States, it is almost entirely a story about corn.
It's always corn.
It's always corn. In Europe, you might see wheat or potato starch, but the basic process is the same. You take starch, those long glucose chains, and you find a way to chop them up into individual glucose molecules.
How do you do that? You can't just boil it, right?
No, you need enzymes. The process is called enzymatic hydrolysis. It basically mimics what your own digestive system does, just in a giant vat.
Okay, walk me through it.
Step 1 is liquefaction. You make a slurry of cornstarch and water, and you add an enzyme called alpha amylase, which usually comes from a bacteria. This enzyme's like a big machete. It just hacks the long starch chains into shorter, more manageable pieces.
So you go from a giant ball of yarn to a bunch of shorter strings.
Exactly. But it's not glucose yet. For that, you need step 2, saccharification. You add a second, more precise enzyme called glucoamylase. This one is like a tiny pair of scissors that snips the individual glucose molecules off the ends of those strings.
And that's what gives you corn syrup.
That gives you glucose syrup, yes. It's about 95% pure glucose.
But this is where I get confused again. I see corn syrup on a label, and I see high fructose corn syrup. They are not the same thing.
Not at all. A huge difference. The glucose syrup we just made isn't actually that sweet. Remember, pure glucose is only about 70 or 80% as sweet as table sugar.
So if you put it in a soda, it would taste kind of bland.
It would taste weak, yeah.
Oh.
So they have to hack it. They add a third enzyme, glucose isomerase. And what this enzyme does is it grabs a glucose molecule and physically rearranges its atoms. It turns the 6-sided ring of glucose into a 5-sided ring.
It turns it into fructose.
It turns about half of it into fructose, which is much, much sweeter. And that blend of about 55% fructose and 35% glucose is what we call high fructose corn syrup. It perfectly mimics the sweetness of table sugar.
So HFCS is an engineered product for sweetness. Pure glucose is used for other things.
Exactly. Pure glucose is used more for its physical properties. It's a humectant.
Humectant, great word. What does it do?
It holds on to water. The reason a soft-baked cookie from the store stays soft for weeks is often because of glucose syrup. It literally pulls moisture from the air and traps it in the cookie.
And it's used in ice cream too, right? To stop it from getting icy.
Yes. It lowers the freezing point and prevents large ice crystals from forming. It's what gives you that smooth, creamy mouthfeel. It really is the Swiss Army knife of food science.
And it's also on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines.
Absolutely critical. In a trauma ward, for someone who can't eat, an IV bag of dextrose is life support. It's the most direct way to get energy into the human body.
Okay. So we've set the stage. Glucose is fuel. It's the foundation of everything. It's an industrial product. But now we have to get to this 2025 Stanford study.
The game changer.
This is the part of the notes that I just had to read it 3 times. Because for 100 years, the central dogma has been glucose is something we burn. It's a log for the fire.
Fuel or structure. Burn it for energy or use it as a building block. That was the choice. Catabolic or anabolic.
But this new research says there's a third option we completely miss.
A massive option. The study suggests that glucose is also a signal, a master regulator that literally tells a cell what to become.
The process of differentiation.
Exactly. That process where a blank slate stem cell decides to become a skin cell or a bone cell or a fat cell. We always thought glucose just provided the energy for that to happen.
Right, like the construction workers need lunch. Glucose is the lunch. But the blueprints for the building come from somewhere else.
That's the perfect analogy. This study showed that glucose is also reading the blueprints. It's pulling the levers.
How? What's the actual mechanism?
They found that an intact glucose molecule binds directly to a very specific protein called IRF6.
IRF6, what's that?
It's a famous transcription factor. It's a protein that controls which genes get turned on and off. We know it's deeply involved in how tissues mature, how skin forms.
So glucose is talking directly to this master protein.
It is. And here is the crucial part, the smoking gun. It does this without being metabolized.
Okay, unpack that. Why is that so important?
Normally, when we think of glucose having an effect, it's because it's being burned to make ATP energy. So to test this, the researchers use fake glucose.
Like glucose.
Glucose analogs. Molecules that look just like glucose, so they can bind to the protein. But they're built so the cell can't actually break them down for energy. They're duds.
And what happened?
The signaling still happened. The IRF6 protein still changed shape. The stem cells still got the message to differentiate. And that is definitive proof. It wasn't the energy from the sugar. It was the physical presence of the sugar molecule itself. It was acting like a piece of information.
That's just wild. It's like finding out that the gasoline in your car isn't just making the engine run, it's also whispering directions to the steering wheel.
That's a great way to put it. And it completely reframes how we have to think about diseases like cancer.
The Warburg effect, right?
Right. Decades ago, Otto Warburg noticed that cancer cells are sugar addicts. They consume enormous amounts of glucose. And the assumption has always been...
They're just hungry, they're growing fast, they need a lot of energy.
Exactly. But this new finding raises a much darker possibility. Cancer is a disease of immature cells that refuse to stop dividing and growing. What if all that excess glucose they're consuming isn't just fuel? What if it's a signal that's keeping them in that immature state?
So the high sugar levels are jamming the signal that would normally tell them to grow up and stop dividing.
That's a very real possibility. The sugar might be actively programming the tumor to stay a tumor, not just feeding it.
It also has huge implications for diabetes. Diabetics have terrible wound healing.
And we always thought that was about poor circulation or bacteria. But what if the high blood sugar is sending the wrong set of blueprints to the new skin cells that are trying to form? What if it's telling them to build the wall incorrectly or not at all?
It just opens up this entirely new way of thinking. It's not just a nutrient anymore. It's acting like a hormone.
It blurs that line completely. It means our body is constantly tasting the glucose level, not just to manage energy with insulin, but to make decisions about the long-term structure of our tissues.
Which brings me to the final thought I want to leave the listener with, because it's a little unsettling.
The glycosine, as you called it.
Yeah. For almost all of human history, getting pure refined glucose was incredibly difficult. You had to find ripe fruit, you had to fight bees for honey.
It was a rare signal, a signal of abundance. It meant times are good, it's safe to grow.
Today, I can go to any corner store and buy a massive bottle of pure liquid glucose for a couple of dollars. We are constantly flooding our bodies with this signal.
We are swimming in it, 2047.
So my question is this. If glucose is a voice that tells our stem cells and our genes what to do, are we now just shouting at our own DNA?
I think we're screaming at it.
And what happens when you scream at a system that evolved over millions of years to listen for a whisper?
You get noise. You get distortion. And in biology, distortion and noise almost always manifest as disease. We might be fundamentally altering our tissues in ways we haven't even begun to understand, all because the signal is just too loud.
It really redefines you are what you eat. It's not just that you're made of the stuff.
The stuff is telling you what to be.
It's not just calories on a nutrition label, it's code.
It is the code of life.
Something to think about. That's all for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.
I want you to picture the absolute worst road trip you have ever been on. You know the kind I'm talking about, where you miss an exit, the GPS dies, maybe you run out of gas in the middle of nowhere, and the snacks are long gone.
The classic, this was supposed to be a 3-hour tour kind of scenario.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, take that feeling of frustration and panic and multiply it by, I don't know, about 1,000. Because the story we are unpacking today is essentially the ultimate grocery run gone wrong.
Huh, that's a good way to put it.
It starts with a guy saying, "I'll be right back with some food," and it ends with him accidentally navigating the entire width of the South American continent.
Accidentally is the key word there. We're diving into the story of Francisco de Orellana, and if you think you know the history of the Amazon or even the conquistadors, this story, it kind of flips everything on its head.
I know the name Orellana, and I know he's associated with the Amazon, but in my head, I always pictured him as this, master explorer. A guy with a map, a compass, and a master plan to find a new trade route.
And that is the first bubble we have to burst right out of the gate. There was no map, there was no plan. This was not a scientific expedition.
Okay.
This was a desperate, starving survival situation from pretty much day one. We're talking about the 1540s here.
So no GPS, no satellite phones, just a lot of steel armor and some very bad decisions.
Precisely. And to really understand Orellana, we have to understand the world he was living in. This is the era of conquistadors, sure. But we need to look past the shiny, history book version of that. By 1541, the golden age of easy conquest was, well, it was actually closing.
What do you mean by that? I thought this was peak conquistador time.
Well, yes and no. The big prizes had already been taken. Hernan Cortez had already conquered the Aztecs in Mexico. Francisco Pizarro, who is a key player in our story today, had already conquered the Incas in Peru.
Right.
They had looted the treasuries. I mean, they were the billionaires of the 16th century.
Okay, so the big jackpots are gone.
Right. But you still have thousands of young Spanish men pouring into the New World. They're soldiers, they're ambitious, they're heavily armed, and they are fundamentally unemployed.
They missed the boat on the big score.
They missed the boat on the Aztec and Inca gold. So they are sitting around in Peru, restless, looking for the next big thing.
Which sounds like a recipe for civil unrest, to be honest.
It was a powder keg. So for the guys in charge, like the Pizarro brothers, they needed to find something for these guys to do. They needed a new rumor to chase.
And there's always a rumor.
Always. And in 1541, the rumor wasn't gold. It was La Canela.
The land of cinnamon. Now, I have to ask, why cinnamon? I mean, I like cinnamon on my toast, maybe in a latte, but I'm not going to march into a jungle and risk death for it. Why were they so obsessed with the spice?
You have to adjust your mindset for inflation, and I don't just mean currency. In the 16th century, spices were the oil of the global economy. They drove international trade. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, these things were incredibly rare in Europe.
So it was a status symbol.
It was a massive status symbol. If you served meat with cinnamon, you were showing off extreme wealth.
So it was like serving caviar and truffles today.
Even more so. It was also used as medicine, as a preservative. If you could find a forest of cinnamon trees, a source that bypassed the expensive trade routes through the Middle East, you weren't just rich, you were buy your own country rich. It was a lottery ticket worth more than a gold mine.
So Gonzalo Pizarro catches wind of this land of cinnamon somewhere to the east of Quito, and he decides to go all in.
He does. Gonzalo is Francisco Pizarro's younger brother. And you have to imagine the psychological pressure there. Your brother is the Francisco Pizarro.
The famous one.
The famous one. You're the younger brother living in his shadow. You need a win. You need your own empire. So when he hears about a valley of cinnamon, he launches what is arguably the most expensive expedition of the time.
And when we say expedition, we aren't talking about a couple of guys with backpacks and hiking sticks.
No, this was a moving city. We're talking about roughly 220 armed Spaniards, cavalry, infantry. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. They brought along roughly 4,000 indigenous porters from the Andes to carry the supplies.
4,000. That is a massive amount of people to feed and organize.
It gets crazier. They brought nearly 2,000 live pigs,
Pigs.
walking bacon. You can't preserve meat easily in the jungle, so you bring the animals with you and slaughter them as you go. They also brought hordes of hunting dogs, llamas for carrying gear, and of course, horses for the cavalry. It was a massive, chaotic parade leaving Quito in February 1541.
And this is where Orellana comes in.
Yes, Francisco de Orellana was a childhood friend of the Pizarros. They were all from the same town in Spain, Trujillo. It's actually wild how many conquistadors came from this one tiny, dusty town.
It's like the Silicon Valley of 16th century conquest.
Basically. Orellana had already lost an eye in a previous battle, so he's this rugged, one-eyed veteran. He's appointed as Gonzalo Pizarro's lieutenant. He actually had to scramble to gather his own troops and horses to catch up with the main group.
So they merge forces and they head east. Now, I've looked at a map of Ecuador. Going east from Quito means crossing the Andes Mountains and then dropping down into the Amazon basin. That transition sounds rough.
Rough is an understatement. It's a biological shock. You start in the high Andes, it's cold, thin air, freezing rain. Then you descend rapidly into the Amazon cloud forest. The temperature spikes, the humidity hits 100%, and the vegetation just becomes a wall.
And remember, these guys are wearing 16th century armor.
Exactly. Full steel breastplates, chainmail, heavy wool padding underneath to prevent chafing. They are basically walking ovens. They're rusting inside their own clothes. And almost immediately, the expedition starts to fall apart.
How fast are we talking?
Incredibly fast. The accounts are terrifying. Before they even reach the flatlands, they're hit by an earthquake. Then, as they drop into the jungle, the livestock starts dying. The horses get hoof rot. But the human toll is the worst part.
I read that the attrition rate for the indigenous porters was just catastrophic.
It was a tragedy. You have people from the high Andes, adapted to cold, dry climates, suddenly forced to march through a malaria-ridden tropical swamp carrying heavy loads. They died by the hundreds, then the thousands. Disease, exhaustion, hunger.
So the massive army is shrinking every single day.
By the time they reach the Coca River, which is a tributary of the Napo River, the expedition is a shadow of itself. They've found some cinnamon trees, but they're scattered, poor quality. It's not the forests of gold they were promised.
So the dream of the lottery ticket is fading, and now they are just hungry.
Starving. They have eaten all the pigs. They have eaten the llamas.
Right.
Now they are looking at the dogs.
Man, that is grim. And this is where the terrain really turns against them, right? They can't just walk back.
Right. The jungle is too dense to hack through with swords and machetes effectively, especially when you are weak from hunger. The river becomes the only road. But they don't have a boat.
So they have to build one. Now, hold on. These are soldiers. They aren't shipwrights. They are in the middle of a rainforest. They don't have a Home Depot. How do you build a seaworthy vessel in the middle of the jungle?
This is one of those Apollo 13 moments of history that I just love. It highlights the ingenuity of desperation. They set up a forge in the middle of the jungle. They need nails, right? So what do they use?
They don't have nails.
They have horses, dead or dying horses. They take the horseshoes, melt them down in charcoal fires, and forge them into nails.
Wow. Talk about burning your bridges or, well, burning your transportation to build a boat.
It was a massive sacrifice. The horse was the tank of the 16th century. Giving up a horse was admitting you weren't going to ride home. For caulking the stuff to seal the wood gaps, they used their own torn clothes mixed with gum from rubber trees, likely taught to them by the few remaining indigenous guides.
And the wood.
They hacked down green trees. It wasn't seasoned wood, which is terrible for boat building because it warps, but they had no choice. They built a brigantine, a large oared vessel, and they named it the San Pedro.
But this wasn't an escape vessel for everyone, was it?
No, it wasn't big enough. It was essentially an ambulance. They loaded the sickest men, the heaviest gear, and the few remaining precious items onto the boat. The plan was for the boat to float down the river while the rest of the army walked along the bank.
So they are limping along, a boat in the water, walking skeletons on the shore.
And it's agonizingly slow. The people on the bank are hacking through vines, wading through swamps. They're making maybe 2 miles a day. And there is no food. They are literally boiling the leather from their saddles and belts with herbs just to chew on something that tastes like protein.
I can't even imagine the level of desperation where a belt looks like dinner.
It's the end of the line. And this brings us to the Great Split. It's December 1541. They're camped by the river. They are dying. Pizarro hears a rumor from some captured natives that there is a village with food a few days downriver.
A glimmer of hope.
Pizarro makes a command decision. He calls Orellana. He says, take the San Pedro, take 57 men, take the remaining healthy ones, go downstream, find this village, load up on food, and come back to save us.
It sounds like a standard military maneuver.
Yes.
Send out a scouting party, secure supplies, return to base.
Theoretically, yes. Orellana agrees. He takes the boat, takes the men, and pushes off into the current. And here is where the hydrology of the Amazon basin changes history. The current in these upper tributaries is violent. We aren't talking about a lazy river ride, it's a torrent. The San Pedro is swept downstream at incredible speed. They cover in a few hours what would have taken the walking group weeks.
And do they find the village?
They find nothing, just endless green, impenetrable jungle. They go for a day, 2 days, 3 days. No village, no food.
And now they have a problem. They've gone way too far.
Exactly. They realize that even if they found food now, they could never get it back to Pizarro. They try to turn the boat around just to test it, and they realize the truth. They physically cannot row this heavy, homemade boat upstream against that current.
So they are trapped by the physics of the river.
They are past the point of no return.
This is where the controversy starts, isn't it? Because back at the camp, Pizarro was waiting. And waiting. He's eating leather straps, watching his men die, scanning the river for Orellana, and Orellana never shows up.
Pizarro was furious. When he eventually gave up and walked back to Quito, a journey that took months and killed most of the remaining survivors, he branded Orellana a traitor. He called it a mutiny. He said Orellana stole the boat and abandoned them to die.
But looking at it from Orellana's boat, do they have a choice?
This is where we have to rely on the account of Gaspar de Carvajal. He was a Dominican friar who was on the boat with Orellana. He wrote a chronicle of the journey, essentially a diary.
And what does the friar say?
He describes a near mutiny, but not against Pizarro. The crew mutinied against the idea of going back. Orellana apparently wanted to try, or at least he said he did. But the men, starving and exhausted, signed a document which Carvajal recorded saying, "If you force us to row back, we will die. It is a suicide mission we refuse."
So Orellana is stuck between a rock and a hard place. If he goes back, his men rebel, and they all likely die of exhaustion. If he goes forward, he's technically disobeying orders and abandoning his commander.
Exactly. He's looking at the water, looking at his starving crew, and he makes the only choice he can. He resigns his command, and the men elect him as their new leader, a legal trick to protect himself from treason charges later, and they decide to follow the river wherever it goes.
Into the absolute unknown. They don't have a map. They don't know if this river flows to the ocean or if it goes over a massive waterfall.
They are flying blind, and this begins part 2, the descent. They are now alone. 50-ish men and a priest in a homemade boat drifting into the heart of the continent.
So let's talk about life on the river. They're still starving, right?
Oh, it gets worse before it gets better. They are in the river of darkness. For weeks, they're scavenging roots, eating toxic plants that make them sick, boiling their shoes. Carvajal writes about how they look like ghosts.
But they eventually hit the Napo River proper, and things start to change. They start seeing signs of life.
They do. They hear drums. Imagine the terror of that. You are floating down a river, weak and vulnerable, and you hear the rhythmic beating of drums from the jungle. It means you are being watched. It means the news of your arrival is traveling faster than you are.
And they realize the San Pedro isn't going to be enough.
Yeah.
If they hit the ocean, a river barge won't survive the waves.
Right. They need a bigger boat. So, in the middle of hostile territory, while constantly being harassed by indigenous canoes, they decide to stop and build a second vessel. The Victoria.
I love the optimism of that name.
Victory. It's pure survival instinct. They set up another forge, they use charcoal, and again, the ingenuity, they use the fibers from forest plants to weave rope. They use oil and fat from turtles and manatees to seal the hull.
Manatees.
The Amazon is full of life. Once they got lower down the river, food became less of an issue because they could fish, hunt turtles, and yes, raid native villages.
Which I assume didn't make them very popular with the locals.
Not at all. We have to be clear here. They were invaders. They were stealing food to survive. The indigenous groups, like the Omaguas, defended their territory. Orellana's men were constantly dodging arrows, fighting skirmishes on the riverbanks, and fleeing back to the boats.
And the river just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
It becomes an inland sea. The Amazon isn't like the Mississippi or the Danube. In the rainy season, it can be 30 miles wide. You can't see the other bank. It's terrifyingly vast. Carvajal describes storms on the river that were as violent as storms at sea.
So they pass the Rio Negro, which Orellana named because the water looked black like ink and they keep drifting east. And then, in June 1542, They have the encounter that changes the name of the river forever.
The Amazon incident.
Set the scene. Where are they?
They are likely near the Trombetas River Junction. They approach a village to look for food, expecting the usual resistance. But this time, the resistance is different.
Different how?
Carvajal writes that the fight was incredibly fierce. The indigenous warriors were organized and relentless. And leading the charge, or at least fighting in the front lines, were women.
Women warriors.
Yes. Carvajal describes them vividly. He says they were tall, fair-skinned, which might be an exaggeration, and they fought like 10 Indian men. They were firing arrows with incredible precision. They were clubbing the Spanish soldiers.
And Orellana, watching this from the deck of the Victoria, has a light bulb moment.
You have to remember, Orellana is a man of the Renaissance. He's educated, he knows his Greek mythology, he knows the stories of Herodotus and Diodorus.
The Amazons, the legendary tribe of warrior women from Asia Minor who supposedly cut off their breasts to shoot bows better.
Exactly. For centuries, Europeans had been obsessed with the idea that the Amazons were real, living somewhere on the edge of the known world. When Orellana sees these women fighting, he doesn't just see a different cultural gender role, he sees a myth come to life. He goes, aha, we found them. These are the Amazons.
It's fascinating how they projected their own stories onto the New World. They didn't have a frame of reference for what they were seeing, so they just pasted a Greek myth right on top of it.
It's a classic example of cognitive bias. He expected monsters and marvels, so when he saw strong women fighting, he categorized them as Amazons, and the name stuck. He called the river Rio de las Amazonas.
And that's why we don't call it the Orellana River today.
Although for a while, some maps did try to call it that, but the myth was too powerful. The Amazon is just a better story.
So they survive the Amazons, they keep drifting. We need to emphasize the duration of this. They left Pizarro in December. It is now August.
8 months. 8 months of rotting clothes, rusting armor, constant mosquito attacks, sleeping in a cramped boat. The mental toll must have been staggering.
But finally, on August 26, 1542, the water changes taste.
It turns salty. They reach the Atlantic.
The relief must have been overwhelming. But they are not safe yet. Now they are in 2 homemade boats, the San Pedro and the Victoria, staring at the open ocean.
And riverboats, specifically flat-bottom brigantines built with green wood and horse-nail spikes, are not designed for ocean swells. They had to navigate north along the coast of Brazil and the Guianas to try and reach Spanish settlements in Venezuela.
And they get separated.
They do. In the night, the 2 boats lose contact. Orellana on the Victoria thinks the San Pedro is lost. But miraculously, both crews manage to navigate the currents and storms. They reunite on the island of Cubagua in September.
That is an unbelievable stroke of luck. To travel across a continent, get separated in the ocean, and then bump into each other at the finish line.
It just reinforces the whole accidental odyssey theme. They shouldn't have survived any of this.
So Orellana makes it back to Spain. He has a hell of a story to tell. But the story he tells, well, people didn't believe him.
And this brings us to the most controversial and maybe the most interesting part of this deep dive, the civilization question.
Right, so Carvajal finishes his book, The Relation. And he doesn't just describe trees and monkeys. What exactly does he claim he saw?
He describes a densely populated civilization. He talks about seeing cities that gleamed white stretching for miles along the riverbanks. He describes massive fleets of canoes, organized road systems, and huge stores of food. He essentially describes a thriving, complex society, maybe comparable to the Incas or Aztecs, but in the jungle.
And for about 400 years, historians looked at this book and said, yeah, right.
They dismissed it completely. They called Carvajal a liar, a fantasist, or just delirious from hunger.
Why were they so skeptical?
Because when later explorers went back a century or 2 later, they didn't see any of it. They saw small, scattered tribes living in thatched huts. They saw endless, empty jungle. They saw no stone cities, no massive roads.
So they assumed Carvajal just made it all up to impress the king.
Exactly. Look at this great land I discovered. Please give me funding. There was also a scientific argument called the counterfeit paradise theory. The idea that the Amazon looks lush, but it's actually a desert in disguise. The soil is acidic and poor. If you cut down the trees to farm, the nutrients wash away in the rain. Therefore, the argument went, the Amazon cannot support a large civilization. It's biologically impossible.
And here is where it gets really interesting. Modern science has started to say, wait a minute.
Yes. In the last few decades, archaeology has completely vindicated Carvajal. He wasn't lying.
So how do you explain the soil problem? If the dirt is bad, how did millions of people eat?
That brings us to terra preta.
which means black earth in Portuguese.
Correct. Archaeologists started finding these patches of soil along the riverbanks that were totally different from the surrounding yellow clay. This soil was dark, black, and incredibly fertile. You could plant anything in it.
But it wasn't natural.
No, it was anthropogenic, man-made.
Wait, how do you make soil?
It's a technology called biochar. The indigenous people practiced slash and char, not slash and burn. They would smolder wood and waste to create charcoal, then mix it with pottery shards, fish bones, compost, and manure. This mixture created a super soil that retained nutrients for centuries.
So they were terraforming the Amazon?
Literally. They engineered the ground beneath their feet to overcome the limitations of the rainforest. And the scale of this is mind-blowing. We're finding patches of terra preta that cover hundreds of acres.
And the existence of the dirt proves the existence of the people.
You don't get millions of tons of engineered soil by accident. It implies a massive sedentary population that lived there for thousands of years.
So Carvajal did see cities.
He saw the riverfront settlements of a civilization that we now estimate had a population of around 5 million people in 1500.
5 million, that's huge.
It's comparable to major European nations at the time.
So the big question is, where did they go? If Orellana saw them in 1542, and the next guys didn't see them in 1650, what happened in between?
The same thing that happened in Mexico and Peru, but faster. Disease. Smallpox, influenza, measles. The tragedy is that the diseases traveled faster than the explorers. Orellana and his men likely introduced these pathogens, or they spread from the Andes down the trade routes.
So the germs moved down the river ahead of the next expedition.
Exactly. In a dense population like that, living in connected cities along a river highway, a virus moves like wildfire. By the time the next Europeans arrived, 90 to 95% of that population was dead. The cities were abandoned, the wooden structures rotted away in the humidity, the jungle reclaimed the land.
That is heartbreaking. It means Orellana was likely the last European to see this civilization intact.
He took a snapshot of a world that was about to end, and because the evidence rotted away, we spent 400 years calling him a liar.
Talk about a heavy legacy. So let's get back to Orellana himself. He survives the trip. He's vindicated, well, 500 years later, but at the time, he thinks he's sitting on a gold mine. He goes back to Spain.
He heads to Valladolid. He wants a reward. He wants to be named governor of the Amazon. He calls it New Andalusia.
Does the king grant it?
Eventually, yes. Prince Philip, who would later be Philip II, gives him the commission in 1544. But it was not easy. Orellana was broke. He was fighting off accusations of treason from the Pizarro camp. He was dealing with Portuguese spies who were worried the Amazon mouth was in their territory.
It sounds like a political thriller.
It was, but amidst all this drama, Orellana does something very surprising. He gets married.
To Ana de Ayala.
Yes, she was a young woman, very poor. And Orellana decides, I'm going back to the Amazon to found a colony, and I'm taking my wife with me.
That seems ambitious. Taking a civilian woman into the green hell in the 1540s.
It was almost unheard of for a first wave of conquest. But it shows his mindset. He wasn't just going to loot and leave. He wanted to settle. He wanted to build a home.
So the stage is set. This is 1545. Orellana has his commission, his wife, 4 ships, and 300 men. This is the return of the king moment.
And it is an unmitigated disaster from the moment the anchor lifts.
What goes wrong?
Everything. It's actually painful to recount. Before they even cross the Atlantic, they stop in the Cape Verde Islands. An epidemic sweeps through the fleet.
Probably dysentery or flu.
Something like that. It kills 98 men. That's a third of his force dead before they even see America.
Then they hit the ocean.
And they lose a ship. One of the vessels, carrying 77 men and 11 horses, just disappears in a storm, never seen again.
So he arrives at the mouth of the Amazon with a battered fleet, starving men, and thin horses.
And the Amazon mouth is tricky. It's a delta full of islands and sandbars. They get lost. They can't find the main channel they came down years before.
And the locals?
They remember. The indigenous tribes aren't surprised this time. They are hostile. They attack the landing parties. There is no food.
The source material gets really dark here. It says they were back to eating the dogs.
Yes. History repeats itself as a tragedy. They are stranded in the swamp. They eat the dogs. Then they eat the remaining horses.
The very things that gave them an advantage.
Once the horses were gone, they were just dying men in a swamp. Orellana is frantic. He takes a small boat to try and find the main river channel to find food. He fails.
And Orellana, the man who survived the unsurvivable the first time.
He breaks. Physically, he's sick, likely malaria or some tropical fever. But mentally, he returns to his camp to find more of his men dead. and in November 1546, he dies.
There's a quote from his wife, isn't there?
Yes, Ana de Ayala survived, incredibly. She was rescued by a passing ship later. She said Orellana died of illness and grief.
Grief. That hits hard.
I think it speaks to the totality of the failure. He had seen the promised land, he had the title of governor, but he couldn't conquer the geography a second time. He died lost in the intricate mouth of the very river he gave his name to.
And he was buried there.
Presumably. We don't know where his grave is. The river likely washed it away. He became part of the Amazon.
It's such a tragic arc. He starts as a sidekick, becomes an accidental hero, discovers a civilization, gets branded a traitor, and then returns only to die of a broken heart in the swamp.
It really is Shakespearean. But his legacy is undeniable. He put the Amazon on the map, literally.
So let's zoom out and look at the big picture. What is the takeaway here?
I think the biggest takeaway is about the nature of discovery. Orellana is often remembered as a failure because he didn't find El Dorado. He didn't find a mountain of gold.
But he found something arguably more important.
He found the Amazon civilization. He was the witness. He saw the potential of the rainforest to support humanity in a way that we are only just now rediscovering with Terra Preta.
But the tragedy is that his discovery was the bell that tolled for that civilization.
Exactly. It raises that provocative question, does discovering something inevitably change it? Or in this case, destroy it? Orellana opened the door, and the world he found vanished through it.
That is a heavy thought. He found a world, named it after a myth, and then that world became a myth itself.
A ghost story told by a friar that turned out to be true.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap up. It certainly makes you think twice about complaining when your flight is delayed or you get stuck in traffic.
Yeah. It definitely puts our modern travel disasters into perspective. At least we don't have to build a boat out of horseshoes.
True. Thanks for taking this journey with us, everyone.
Stay curious.
We'll catch you on the next Deep Dive. Okay, I want you to just close your eyes for a second. Imagine you're in a coffee shop, maybe Tokyo, maybe San Francisco. It's just a normal Tuesday. And then the coffee in your cup starts to ripple, just a little. You know, like that scene in Jurassic Park, but heavier.
Oh, I know that feeling.
And then the ground jumps. Not a shake, a jump. You look out the window.
Yeah.
And rising out of the bay is something that just, it shouldn't exist. It's towering over the bridge. It's covered in kelp. It's breathing radioactive fire. And it looks furious.
It's the ultimate cinematic spectacle, isn't it? The giant monster, the creature that reminds us very, very loudly that we are not at the top of the food chain.
Exactly. And we've all seen the movies. We've seen the GIFs. You know, the guys in the rubber suits knocking over cardboard pagodas. We all know the roar.
Of course.
But today, on the Deep Dive, we are ignoring all that surface-level popcorn stuff. We're going way deeper. We're talking about a genre that is, well, it's arguably the most successful export of Japanese pop culture in history. We're talking about kaiju.
And honestly, pop culture almost feels a bit small for what this really is, because when you peel back the rubber suit, you find this whole history of profound national trauma, incredible innovation and special effects, and a linguistic rabbit hole that goes back centuries.
That's our mission today. We're going to move you from just, oh, look, a big lizard, to actually understanding the difference between a kaiju, a seijin, and a kaijin.
Yeah, all those terms.
And we're going to look at why the physics of a guy in a suit, believe it or not, sometimes works better than CGI.
Yeah.
And we're going to try to figure out why a genre that critics literally called juvenile trash in the 1950s is still dominating the global box office 70 years later.
It is a massive topic, so where do you want to start? The bomb, the suits.
Let's start with the word itself. Because I think most people, and I'll include myself in this, you hear kaiju and you just think Godzilla. But the word's been around a lot longer than the movie studios, right?
Oh, much, much longer. If you look at the etymology, the Japanese word kaiju is written with two characters. You have kai, which means strange or mystery, and then ju, which means beast.
So, strange beast.
Literally strange beast.
That sounds almost mythological.
It is mythological. The term didn't start with film at all. It was originally used to describe creatures from, ancient folklore. You see it in the Shanhai Jing, which is this ancient Chinese text, basically a catalog of beasts and demons.
Classic of mountains and seas.
Right, that's the one. And when that text made its way to Japan, the whole concept of the kaiju, this strange beast from beyond the edges of civilization, it just took root.
So originally, a kaiju wasn't necessarily a giant dinosaur destroying a city. It could be anything weird.
Exactly. It was a catch-all for the inexplicable biological world. I mean, in the Meiji era, when Japan opened up and started importing Western science, they used the word kaiju to describe completely real things.
Like what?
Well, if you were a Japanese student in, say, 1880, and you saw a fossil of a triceratops for the first time, or even just a drawing of a hippopotamus in a foreign book.
A hippo would be a kaiju.
That was a kaiju. It was a strange beast you'd never seen before.
That actually makes a lot of sense. A hippo is pretty strange if you've never seen one.
Right, but this is where the Western understanding of the word gets it wrong. In English, we use kaiju specifically to mean giant monster.
Right, big monster.
But in Japanese, size isn't inherent to the word. A kaiju can be human-sized. It can even be small. If you want to specify the skyscraper toppling variety, the correct term is daikaiju.
Dai, that means big, right?
Yes, exactly. Dai is the prefix for giant. So the 1954 film, it's not just a kaiju movie. If you look at the original poster, it explicitly calls it a Subaku Daikaiju Iga.
Okay, which translates to
H-bomb giant monster movie.
wow, they really put H-bomb right there in the title. They were not hiding the metaphor at all.
Not even a little bit. And we will get to that because you absolutely cannot understand this genre without understanding the hydrogen bomb. But before we get to the nuclear age, I do want to address a big misconception.
What's that?
There's this idea that Japan just invented the whole giant monster attacking a city trope out of thin air.
Well, yeah. I mean, didn't they? That's the whole Godzilla thing.
Actually, no. If we're looking for, let's call it patient zero, the very first time a giant beast wrecked a metropolis on screen, we have to go back to 1921, and we have to go to America.
1921, that's the silent era.
It is. There was this animated short called The Pet by Winsor McCay. He's the genius who did Little Nemo.
Oh, right.
And in The Pet, this mysterious animal just eats everything in sight, grows to a colossal size, and starts rampaging through a city.
So how did they stop it?
An airstrike. The military flies in and bombs it.
Huh. That sounds suspiciously like the ending of a very, very famous giant ape movie.
The blueprint was there a full decade before King Kong. But if you want to talk live action, the real pioneer is The Lost World in 1925.
Based on the Arthur Conan Doyle book.
That's the one. It had these incredible stop-motion dinosaurs by Willis O'Brien, and the climax of that film is a brontosaurus escaping captivity and just smashing up London. It destroys Tower Bridge.
So London got flattened 30 years before Tokyo did. Who knew?
Exactly. And The Lost World was basically the proof of concept for Willis O'Brien's masterpiece, which was, of course, King Kong in 1933.
The grandfather of them all.
Truly, King Kong changed everything. It was a global phenomenon, and it established all the rules. Giant creature, modern city, a hopeless military, and that tragic ending. Japan was watching this very closely.
Right, and I saw this in the nose. They even tried to cash in immediately, didn't they? There were Japanese King Kong ripoffs in the 30s.
Ripoff might be a little harsh, but yeah. In 1933, there was a film called Waseiga Kongu, Japanese King Kong, and then in 1934, one called The Great Buddha Arrival.
Wait, The Great Buddha Arrival? That sounds amazing.
It was. A giant Buddha statue comes to life and just walks through the city. The problem is, sadly, these films are lost. They were either destroyed during the war or just lost to time.
Oh, that's a shame.
All we have are a few still photographs, but they prove that the Japanese film industry was already experimenting with daikaiju concepts way, way before the 1950s.
So the appetite was there. The concept was there.
Mm-hmm.
But the monsters in the 20s and 30s,
Yeah.
they were different. You know, Kong is just a big ape. The dinosaur in the Lost World is just a dinosaur. They're natural animals from a lost world.
Correct. That was what you could call the prehistoric era. The theme was always man discovers something ancient. But then 1945 happens, the atomic age begins, and the monsters change.
They stop being discovered.
They start being created.
This is the shift to the mutant era.
Yes. The 1950s introduced this new fear of science gone wrong. And the first major example is, again, actually American. The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms in 1953.
Ah, a classic Ray Harryhausen film.
The best. In that movie, a fictional dinosaur, a Rhedosaurus, is frozen in the Arctic ice. But what wakes it up? A nuclear test.
And here's a little nugget I found fascinating. When that movie was released in Japan, they changed the title. Do you know what they called it?
I do. The atomic kaiju appears.
The atomic kaiju appears. That is the very first time the word kaiju appears in a film title. So you've got the American concept of the atomic monster merging with the Japanese word kaiju, and that collision just sets the stage perfectly for 1954.
The year it all changed, the release of Godzilla.
Okay, we need to pause here. Because if you're listening to this and you just think of Godzilla as the king of the monsters who fights King Kong and, saves the day, you are missing the entire point of the original film.
You really, really are. The 1954 Godzilla, directed by Ishiro Honda, is not an action movie. It's a horror film. It's a somber, terrifying tragedy. And to understand why, you have to understand the headspace of the Japanese audience in 1954.
We're talking less than a decade after Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Correct. But there was a more immediate trigger, the Lucky Dragon 5 incident.
Tell us about that. The notes mentioned it, but I feel like the gravity of it gets lost in the history books.
It was a complete nightmare. In March of 1954, a Japanese tuna fishing boat, the Daigo Fukuri Maru the Lucky Dragon 5, was trawling in the Pacific.
Okay.
Unbeknownst to them, the United States was conducting a hydrogen bomb test at Bikini Atoll, the Castle Bravo test.
And the test was way bigger than they expected it to be, wasn't it?
Much, much bigger. The wind carried the radioactive fallout, this white ash they called death ash, directly onto the fishing boat. The crew didn't know what it was. They were covered in it.
Oh, my God.
They returned to port, and within days, they were all showing signs of acute radiation syndrome. Their skin turned black. Their hair fell out. The radio operator, Kubayama Aikichi, he eventually died.
And this wasn't some secret, right? This was national news.
It was hysteria. You have to picture the panic. Suddenly, they're using Geiger counters in fish markets all across Japan. People were terrified to eat sushi. Tons and tons of tuna were being buried because they were radioactive. The ocean, which had always been Japan's lifeblood, had turned against them.
And that is exactly how Godzilla starts.
It's a direct recreation. The opening scene of Godzilla isn't a city being smashed, it's a fishing boat. There's a flash of light, the ocean boils, and the crew screams.
Wow.
When Japanese audiences sat in that theater in 1954, they weren't thinking, oh, cool, a monster. They were thinking, this is the news from last week.
That gives me chills. It completely reframes the whole thing. Godzilla wasn't just a dinosaur. He was the bomb.
He was the bomb given flesh. His skin was designed to look like the keloid scars of the Hiroshima survivors. His breath wasn't fire. It was pure radiation. And the destruction of Tokyo in that film, it isn't played for thrills. It's meant to evoke the fire bombings of World War II. It's slow and painful and just dark.
It's interesting, though, because despite all that heavy artistic intent, the critics at the time didn't really get it, did they?
Oh, they hated it. They called it juvenile gimmicks. They thought it was exploitative. But the public got it. It was a way to process this unbelievable trauma in a safe environment. It was a massive commercial success.
And because it was a success, Toho Studios did what studios always do.
They rushed a sequel. Immediately. Godzilla Raids again came out in 1955. And this film introduced the single most important evolution in the entire genre.
Which was?
The enemy monster.
Enter Anguirus.
The spiky ankylosaurus, yeah. In the first film, Godzilla fought humanity. In the second film, he fights Anguirus. And this shifted the entire paradigm from man versus nature to monster versus monster.
Which, let's be honest, is what most of us grew up with. The wrestling matches.
It kicked off the golden age. The films became lighter, more action-oriented. We even developed specific terminology for the fights. So if it's one-on-one, like, say, King Kong versus Godzilla, we call that a monster duel.
A polite duel.
As polite as two 50-meter reptiles can be. But if you have multiple monsters, a chaotic brawl, that is a monster rumble.
A battle royale.
Exactly. The definitive monster rumble was Ghidorah, the three-headed monster in 1964. You had Godzilla, Rodan, and Mothra, who were all former enemies, teaming up to fight King Ghidorah.
And speaking of Ghidorah, that brings us into the 1960s. The space age. The themes shift again. We move away from the grim nuclear metaphor and start looking up at the stars.
Absolutely. The space race was on everyone's mind, so naturally the monster started coming from space. King Ghidorah isn't a mutant, he's a space dragon. We got films like The X from Outer Space. Aliens started showing up, usually using the monsters as biological weapons to try and conquer Earth.
And you can't talk about the 60s without mentioning the competition. Toho had the market cornered with Godzilla, but Diafilm wanted a piece of the action. So they created the giant flying turtle.
Gamera.
I have to say, just for the sheer weirdness factor, I love Gamera. He flies by spinning like a UFO. It's ridiculous.
Gamera is fascinating because his evolution perfectly mirrors the genre's shift toward younger and younger audiences. He started as a threat in his first film, but the studio saw that kids loved the monsters, so they pivoted.
And he became, what was it?
Gamera became the friend to all children, or the guardian of children.
Which is such a hilarious pivot. Don't worry, kids. The giant fire-breathing turtle is here to save you by crushing that entire city block over there.
It worked, though. It cemented the idea that kaiju could be heroes, or at least protectors. They became defenders of the Earth, rather than just walking natural disasters.
Okay, so we've got the history down. We've gone from the trauma of Godzilla to the space wrestling matches of the 70s. But one thing I promise is that we'd help decode the vocabulary. Because if you dive into this stuff, you get hit with all these specific terms. Mecha, kaijin, seijin.
It can be a little overwhelming, but the distinctions are actually really useful. They function as a kind of taxonomy for Japanese pop culture.
All right, let's do a field guide to kaiju. I'll throw a term at you. You give me the definition, but also, like, the mental model. How do I spot one in the wild?
Alrighty, let's do it.
First up, Mecha Kaiju.
Okay, that one's the easiest. These are mechanical or cybernetic monsters.
So robots.
Yeah, but specifically robots built in the image of a monster. Usually they're created by aliens to invade or by humans to defend against the biological kaiju. The classic example is, of course, Mechagodzilla, introduced in 1974.
Who is arguably cooler than the real Godzilla. He has finger missiles.
He is a huge fan favorite. There's also Matani Kong back in 1967. The key here is just that they are artificial. They represent technology trying to match the raw power of nature.
Got it. Okay, next term. This one confuses people because it sounds like kaiju, but it's different. Kaijin.
Right, kaijin. Literally strange person.
Strange person. So my neighbor.
Well, perhaps. But in tokusatsu terms, these are human-sized or maybe slightly larger, distorted humanoids.
Okay, so if I'm watching a show, how do I know if I'm looking at a small kaiju or a kaijin? Is it just about the height?
Height is part of it, but the real litmus test is agency.
Agency? What do you mean?
Well, think about Godzilla. Does Godzilla have a political agenda? Does he give a big monologue about the flaws of capitalism before he steps on a train?
No, he just roars and breaks stuff. He's an animal, a force of nature.
Exactly. A kaiju is treated like a hurricane or an earthquake. A kaijin, on the other hand, typically has human-level intelligence, speech, and a specific, usually nefarious plot.
So, kind of like the weekly villains in Power Rangers.
That is the perfect example. The term goes back to 1930s literature, but in modern pop culture, think of the villains in Kamen Rider or the foot soldiers in Super Sentai, which is what Power Rangers is based on. If it talks to you and explains its evil plan, it's a kaijin. If it just tries to eat you, it's a kaiju.
That is incredibly helpful. Okay, next one. Seijin.
Star people. This is the Japanese term for extraterrestrials.
Like aliens.
Yep. But specifically in this genre, seijin are often the puppet masters. They're the ones controlling the kaiju. A famous example would be Alien Baltan from the Ultraman series. They look like these weird cicada people.
Cicada people, that's terrifying. And finally, what's an ultra kaiju?
That's just a branding classification, really. It refers specifically to any monster that appears in the long-running Ultra series Ultraman. Because that franchise has been going since 1966 and has such a massive bestiary, they just get their own subcategory.
It's like the Marvel Universe versus the DC Universe. They've got their own roster.
Precisely.
So we know what they are, we know where they came from, but we have to talk about how they're made. Because this is the thing that I think prevents a lot of modern Western audiences from getting into the old movies. They see the suit.
They see the zipper.
They see the zipper. They see the rubber folds, and they laugh. They compare it to Jurassic Park or Avatar, and they just say it looks fake. But you'd argue that suitmation, the technique of a guy in a suit, is a legitimate art form with its own physics.
It is absolutely an art form. And to understand it, you have to talk about the man who invented it. Eiji Tsuburaya.
The special effects was it?
Tsuburaya is a legend. When they were making Godzilla in '54, they considered using stop motion, like King Kong. But stop motion is incredibly time-consuming. You're moving a puppet a tiny fraction of an inch, taking a photo, moving it again. It takes months.
And Toho did not have months.
They had a release date breathing down their necks. So Tsuburaya decided to build a suit, but he ran into a really big problem. How do you make a 6-foot-tall actor look like a 50-meter-tall monster?
It's a scale problem.
It's a physics problem. Think about mass. When you watch old stop motion, as brilliant as Harryhausen's work is, the creatures can sometimes feel a bit weightless. They're jittery.
Right, they feel light.
Tsuburaya realized that to sell the scale, you needed actual physical resistance. You needed the suit itself to be heavy. The very first Godzilla suit weighed over 200 pounds.
200 pounds.
Yeah, it was made of concrete, rubber, and wire. The actor inside, Haruo Nakajima, he was a judo expert, and even he could barely move in it. He was constantly passing out from heat exhaustion. But that struggle is what translated to the screen.
Because he literally had to lumber. He couldn't just walk normally.
Exactly. But the real magic trick, the thing that truly makes suitmation work, is the frame rate.
Oh, talk to me about the cameras.
Okay, so standard film runs at 24 frames per second. If you film a guy in a suit at 24 frames per second, it looks like a guy in a suit. It looks like a mascot at a baseball game.
It's too fast.
It's way too fast. Giant things move slowly. Gravity seems to act on them differently. So Tsuburaya overcranked the cameras. He filmed at 72 frames per second or even higher, 3 times the normal speed.
Then you play that back at normal speed.
The action is slowed down by a factor of 3. A quick stomp becomes a lumbering, heavy thud. The dust that kicks up from a collapsing building hangs in the air 3 times as long. It gives the destruction a real heft.
That's the secret sauce. That's why even though your brain knows it's a suit, your gut feels the weight of it.
Exactly. It creates an atmosphere that early CGI just couldn't replicate. You look at the 1998 American Godzilla, that CGI was weightless. The monster moved too fast. It felt like a cartoon. Suitmation, or tokusatsu, has a tangible, physical presence. It's gritty. You can feel the destruction.
It's really just a stylistic choice then. It's
Yeah.
like the difference between a photorealistic painting and a stylized charcoal drawing. They're both art. They just have different goals.
And many fans, myself included, would argue that the limitations of the suit actually helped the storytelling. Because the monster couldn't do backflips, the directors had to rely on composition, on lighting, on silhouette to create fear and awe.
It forces creativity.
Precisely.
So bringing this all together, we've gone from ancient strange beasts in Chinese texts all the way to H-bomb metaphors through the wrestling matches of the Golden Age and the unique craft of suitmation. It's a really rich history.
It is.
But the genre isn't dead. I mean, far from it. We're living in a massive kaiju renaissance right now.
We absolutely are. The Monsterverse, the legendary pictures movies with Godzilla and Kong, has been a huge box office success. We had Pacific Rim, which was basically Guillermo del Toro's love letter to the whole mecha versus kaiju genre.
Right, and Cloverfield brought the found footage angle to it. And you see it everywhere in pop culture. Pokemon, I mean, half the Pokemon designs are inspired by kaiju. Tyranitar is basically just Godzilla.
And music videos, the Beastie Boys' Intergalactic is a perfect tribute to Giant Robo and Godzilla.
I can hear the robot voice in my head right now. Intergalactic, planetary.
The genre endures because the metaphor is so flexible. That is the fascinating part. The monster evolves to fit the anxiety of the era. In the 50s, it was radiation. In the 70s, it was pollution. There was a monster called Hedorah, the smog monster. Today, you could easily argue the kaiju represent environmental collapse, climate change. Exactly. We see storms getting stronger, fires getting bigger. The kaiju is the avatar of a planet that has just had enough of us. It's the revenge of nature narrative.
Okay, that makes sense.
But there's also something deeper, I think, more philosophical. There's this concept called the sublime. The sublime is the feeling you get when you see something so massive, so powerful, and so dangerous that it terrifies you. But because you're viewing it from a safe distance, that terror transforms into awe.
No.
Exactly. In our modern lives, we think we control everything. We have air conditioning, we have insurance, we have smartphones, we feel like masters of our own domain. The kaiju is a reminder that we are actually very, very small. It is. And in 1954, that reminder was terrifying because of the bomb. But today, in a world that feels increasingly digital and intangible, Maybe we actually crave that reminder. We crave the sheer, overwhelming physical awe of a giant beast. Maybe we want to feel small. Couldn't have said it better myself. Strange beast, see the history, see the craft, and see the reflection of our own anxiety staring right back at us. Until next